Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Site Selectors Are People Too. I'm your host, as always, Devin Hillsdon-Smith. Today, we have another episode of Stories from the Road, and I could not be more pleased to introduce my buddy who I've known for way too long, ever since law school. He is the reason he created this monster. I am in economic development because of him. We have Deputy Mayor in Zionsville, Indiana, Justin Hage. Justin, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Devin. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. How do you feel about being the monster, the person that created this monster?
Well, sorry to economic development across our country, but glad you're here, part of the team.
Good to hear. I'll take that. So you've had an interesting, I like to start off by getting the audience acquainted with you, right? You've had an interesting path. So I could go through this, right? You've worked for George W. Bush administration. You worked under Governors Mitch Daniels and Mike Pence. You then went private sector and you're back in the public sector. So how did you first get into economic development from, well, what were you doing for the Bush administration and how did that translate to economic development at the state level?
So when I worked at the George W. Bush administration, that was with the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. So I think I naturally started at a place in federal government where there's sort of a nexus between public policy and business in terms of trying to help businesses that are exporting and importing to and from the United States, trying to reduce trade barriers across the world for U.S. service providers, manufacturers, ranchers, farmers. So I think that was really one thing that I was looking for. My wife and I moved here. She's a native of Brownsburg. I grew up in the D.C. area, looking for a place to land here in Indiana. I ended up at the Office of Management and Budget. So I actually saw sort of a broad scope of Indiana government before I went to the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, where we got a chance to know each other. But I was actually, when we first moved to Indiana, I was interested in potentially working at the IEDC because I saw that as it was a place where state government was engaging with international companies, trying to attract international companies, trying to work with business. So again, that nexus between sort of public policy and business. So that's really where I think I've followed that thread throughout my career as well.
Now, before you keep going here, how did you decide to get into the Office of Trade, the U.S. Trade Rep?
Honestly, I stumbled into it a little bit. I was working. I was on Capitol Hill. I was an intern on Capitol Hill, and I was looking for a full-time opportunity. And I think I put my resume into a job bank. And they happened to pull my resume out of the Senate job bank. My former boss, the deputy USTR at the time, used to work in the Senate. So I think he knew there was kind of staffers in that world. So I really just literally got a call out of the blue and said, hey, we have your resume here. And ironically, I was a political science major, but it's a relatively obscure, small agency within the White House that focuses specifically on trade. It used to be part, even before the Kennedy administration, used to be part of the State Department, but they saw there was differences in sort of policy objectives of trade versus foreign policy. So they separated it and made it a very small specialized agency within the White House. So
did you ever get to meet W?
I did, yes. I got a chance to go to the Oval Office with my family and with my now wife. And so, we got a chance.
I think I've seen that picture.
Yes.
Yeah. Very proud moment.
Yeah, for sure.
So you stumbled into this profession like we all do, right?
Yes. And then I definitely stumbled into the economic development aspect, again, trying to look for a place within state government where business, and particularly international business, maybe interacts with state government. And this was the one place. And I got a chance, like I said, at OMB at first, and one of the agencies I worked with. So this was during the Daniels administration. He was very, focused on performance-based budgeting, and there was key performance indicators for every agency.
Yep.
And one of the agencies I got a chance to work with was IEDC, and I always said if there's an opportunity to come to IEDC, and there was a new administration with the Mike Pence administration where they were looking at some new initiatives and they wanted to bring in some new, fresh bodies and perspectives, and so that's when I joined. Was in 2013. 2013,
so 8 years after it was formed.
Yes.
And you are probably most famous in our world for the sign on on the building. And it's funny, I was talking to somebody from another state who had been in Indianapolis recently, and they were complimenting. They said, that is amazing that you guys have those state the work signs up on top of the government center in this random office building for some reason, but you've got them. And they said how much of an impact it made visually on we have arrived and this state does business.
Yes.
Right. And I remember you were part of the team, if not leading the team, that was fighting to get that sign up to try to write all of that good stuff. And thankfully they never took it down. Right.
Well, I will say that when administrations change, logos and taglines change. There is a different sign up there now, but there are still signs up there.
Is there really?
There is, yes. It's a different sign now.
Oh, I haven't even noticed.
But yes. So I remember one day the Secretary of Commerce was like, we're doing this branding exercise, and we had this crazy idea. We want to put signs on the building. So I had to go out and get multiple bids from sign companies, figure out what the permitting was. Then we had to close down Capitol Avenue for a morning to put the crane there to put it up on the building. And, I was very much a utility player at the IDC, and that was one of the many things I did there.
You were the Swiss Army knife of the IDC.
Yes, exactly. So
right.
some trade shows, some new sectors. We leaned into aerospace and defense. We did a whole aerospace and defense breakfast with the Indianapolis Business Journal, and I helped kind of spearhead that. Did some trips to Paris and to Farnborough for the air show, and went to law school at night with you. And so I was kind of didn't exactly go on as many trips because I was going to law school at night, but I did get a chance to go to those air shows. Went to the Hannover Messe, which is the largest industrial trade show in the world. So did lots of great things there.
Yeah. And so then you bail out of IEDC, and you didn't come straight here. You went into the private sector.
So I went to a law firm at first. So I wanted to kind of hone and refine my legal skills. So did a number of things there, whether it was tax abatement projects or it was working on renewable energy. Also did some public policy type work, and then started to get into zoning and land use and real estate as well. So kind of different aspects of economic development at a law firm here in Indianapolis.
Yeah. And now you're over here, and you've lived, did AI get this right? You've lived in Zionsville since 2018?
Yes. So I took a couple of other
stops.
How
did it know that?
Yes, I know. Probably.
You've got something out there.
Articles, but
yeah, there you go.
Made a couple of stops after the law firm. I went to CenterPoint Energy. Yep. So I really wanted to go in-house. And again, another very important aspect of economic development is the utility space. So CenterPoint Energy is both an electric and gas provider, vertically integrated on the electric side in Southwest Indiana, and then about 2/3 of Indiana for natural gas. Excuse me. And I think, as you mentioned, maybe briefly, I was with a software company doing government relations and public sector sales. And then this opportunity to serve as deputy mayor of the town I live in became available in July, August timeframe of 2024. So I've been serving in that role ever since.
So that's a great segue into the topic for today's podcast. So we have explored a number of different topics on this series, and Justin and I were, can I call you Justin, or is it Deputy Mayor Hage?
You may, yes.
Okay, I may call you Justin, thank God, because I'm going to anyways. So we were sitting down for lunch about a month ago, and we just started talking, and something that's unique about Zionsville is that it is a highly affluent community.
Yes.
Do we still call it a suburb, a bedroom community of Indianapolis?
Yes, we can talk a little bit more about that, but for sure, yes.
Okay. But the topic for today's podcast is, how do you do economic development in highly affluent communities, right? These types of communities are not necessarily, and you tell me if I'm wrong, you're not looking for smokestacks, right? You're not looking for big, heavy industry that's going to be, probably not the best next door neighbor to what you already have. So why don't we take that, and from a resident perspective, tell me about Zionsville. Tell the listeners what this community is. Let's set the stage.
Yeah, particularly for your listeners perhaps that don't live in Indiana or aren't as familiar with central Indiana. So we're a suburb just to the northwest of Indianapolis. We're geographically diverse. So we're 67 square miles, which also makes us have different assets, different types of property, different types of residents that are looking for different things in terms of a place to live. I think, as you alluded to, we have a median income of about $170,000 a year. We have a relatively dense, more suburban area closer to Marion County, which is what the county that Indianapolis is in. But then we go all the way to rural areas. And then we go kind of to the west of 65, a major interstate where we have a whole other township that we consolidated with. And so out there's virtually no development. There's a CSX rail line. There is opportunities for perhaps more intense uses. But yes, I think one of the theses I think we're trying to pursue in terms of economic development in Zionsville is, what are the types of employers that would like to come to Zionsville and employ the people that already are living in or are attracted to live in a place like Zionsville? So I think that's really what we're trying to look for, is that fit for people that are looking for really high skill talent.
And it wouldn't be a good fit. Let me put my site selector hat on for a generic manufacturing plant, right? Because when you're talking that your median household income often exceeds $170,000, they are not going to, when they're paying $15-18 an hour, they're not going to find workforce here, unless you're importing from surrounding communities. But the surrounding communities up here are affluent as well.
Correct.
It's a very I live up on the north side as well, over in Carmel, which is kind of known as the affluent community, right? But when you look at Fishers, Westfield, Carmel, Zionsville, Whitestown, Brownsburg, Lebanon. This northern corridor, if you will, in Indianapolis has established itself as the most affluent area in the state of Indiana.
Yes.
And I think even if I have this right, not to talk about your competition, but I think there's a zip code in Carmel that is deemed one of the most affluent in the country.
Certainly could be.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a resident, what does it feel like to live and work in this town?
So it's a good question. I think one of the things that we don't have is a lot of people that do work in this town. Obviously, we have people that are, we have a number of great employers, but that number is relatively small. We have a lot of service businesses, restaurants, shops, that sort of thing. But we have a lot of people that go to work somewhere else during the day. So whether that's in Carmel, whether that's in downtown Indianapolis, whether that's working remotely, we don't necessarily have those places of employment that match those median household incomes, if that makes sense.
It does. And that takes back to you. So we talk about it later, but we can talk about it now. The notion of a bedroom community.
Yes.
The way that you just described it, right? It's cobblestone streets in old downtown. And it's very, I always say that economic development starts with code enforcement. And you can tell in this community. So given what you just said, do you feel as though right now the status quo is that it is a bedroom community, but you're working to pivot off of that? Or do I have that wrong?
No. We are very much a bedroom community now. I think this is a wonderful place to live. It's a wonderful place to play, but it's not as much a place where people work. And so, and we can get into this a little bit more too, in terms of some of the economics and particularly things that are going on at the General Assembly about wanting to encourage folks to where they live is where their local income tax is associated. So I think that's something we're really trying to work on and find ways for people to have their employment be here in Zionsville. Again, I think we have the component that a lot of communities are trying to seek in terms of quality of life, and in terms of those assets, in terms of executive level housing. They try to pursue those things. They try to aspire to that. We have that element already. And we do have property, utilities, I think, is the one thing we need to think about where we want to be very mindful about a future development. But we're going through a comprehensive plan process that's in the 9th inning right now that I think is going to identify some of those spots. But yes, I think there are opportunities to take all of the various pieces that we have in terms of quality of life, in terms of an amazingly educated workforce, and then bring those employers to help tap into that, which I think then brings multiple benefits to our community in terms of where people work is where people go to lunch, and where people work is where they go do personal services throughout the day. And then when people have their places of employment here, whether that's a corporate headquarters or a business, they want to invest in the community, whether that's the arts, whether that's local events, whether that's nonprofits or youth sports. So I think we're trying to add kind of that component that doesn't necessarily exist. Again, there are some tremendous companies. We have Ray Hall, Lanigan, Lemmer Racing here. We've got lots of other great companies that are here.
Did I have that right? That 90% of Zionsville is residential?
Well, I will say 88% of our tax base is residential. Yes.
Okay, so I rounded up there. Yeah.
Again, for people not from Indiana, we have a tax system that is constitutionally capped at 1%, 2%, 3%. 1% is residential. So when you have 88% of your tax base coming from residential, and you want to provide the services, like I said earlier, for a 67 square mile territory, so you're providing. We have a little bit of a different structure. We have an urban district and a rural district, but at the very least, we're providing fire service, for example, across all 67 square miles. So you need to be able to fund those services that, again, those people that are looking for a really high quality of life, they want to see services that are commensurate with that. So we need to be able to diversify our tax base, which I think is another one of our objectives.
What's the vision for diversifying the tax base? Because like you rightly pointed out, residents in a community like this expect a certain level of services, but when you are constitutionally capped at 1% on 88% of your tax base, that doesn't translate well to high-level services.
Right, and then Senate Enrolled Act 1, which was passed in the previous session of the General Assembly, is going to actually decrease the property tax burden for residential property taxpayers. So I think that vision is really trying to, again, diversify by way of bringing, and I think I said it earlier, a good fit. So whether that's corporate headquarters, whether that's life sciences, whether that's, we can talk a little bit about our airport and some of the users that might like to be around an airport. It's really trying to bring in some of those employers, trying to bring in some tax base that is not just residential and that is complementary.
So not an easy gig. I mean, especially in a village that never sleeps, right? And a mayor with a very bold agenda. And I've got it written down here for you, so you probably saw it, but I'm going to ask you just that overarching question. What does a typical day in your seat look like in this type of a situation for an economic developer?
Well, the interesting thing is, so I kind of hold two hats. I am the sole deputy mayor, so I involved in all different things. So whether that's development of a new Department of Public Works campus, or whether that's an issue related to our provision of fire services, or whether that's our budgeting process, which is a months-long process. But then I specifically oversee economic development. So we've got our RDC meetings, we've got a community development corporation, we've got we have a whole really exciting project called Main Street Momentum, where we're doing some road and pedestrian improvements to connect different parts of our village and different parts of our town, doing that safely and doing that in a way that really matches the aesthetics of the village. So it's one of the things I love about this job is it's something different every day.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And no matter where you're working as an economic developer, it's something different every day, which is, for those of us who suffer from ADHD, a wonderful thing. But for those of us that do not, it can be a bit of a challenge, right? Trying to stay focused when you're constantly being pulled in different directions. Like you said, fire provision to economic development to RDC meetings to, right? It's not like they're always planned out,
right?
Either. You get up in the morning assuming you know how the day is going to go, and inevitably you were wrong.
That is correct.
Right? So you've worked at both the federal and the state levels, as well as now the local level. So this is both a question from the levels that you've worked at, as well as temporally, we've seen a change with how economic development is structured. What in the town of Zionsville for you today would be considered a good win, maybe compared to 5-10 years ago, either in Zionsville or when you were working for the feds or the state? Very open-ended question.
I think particularly at the IDC and maybe the time that I was there in particular, you wanted a huge job count, you wanted a massive capex. Here, I don't think it necessarily has to be a really big capex. It doesn't have to be a really big employment number. I think if it can be something that is a really good fit and is, again, going to be high wage, I think that fit is really important for us. So it can be a corporate headquarters of 200 people. Like that would be a great win for us. Right. It could be a R&D facility. I mean, ideally it would have some pretty great capex to it, but it doesn't have to be hundreds of millions. But if it is a life sciences related R&D that has a component that wants to really take advantage of that airport, that would be a massive win for us.
Right. Let's talk about NIMBYism for a second, because in a highly affluent community where 88% of the tax roll is residential, you've got certain expectations.
Yes.
Right. And so that's why I said before, your residents probably do not want you chasing smokestacks.
Right.
And that's just a general term, right? They could be smokestacks and more highly advanced, but when we say smokestacks, we're talking smelting, something nasty.
Right.
How does NIMBYism raise its ugly head in this community that might be different from, I just talked about NIMBYism last season with John Launis down in a very different area of the state. So what does NIMBYism look like in Zionsville?
I think that the way I like to think about it is there's people that have a way of life, or they have something that they're looking for and why they moved to Zionsville, and to the extent possible, we want to preserve that. But at the same time, I think we want to be able to bring smart development in places where we can allow for the type of growth that is consistent with the character and the architecture that they want to see here. And so we have to demand from users that they're going to have to bring that type of finish to their products here. But I think it's also being smart about where it goes. So again, I mentioned a comprehensive plan. So we're looking at a couple different areas, one being near that airport, which I think can be, it is relatively rural up there, but I think there's a way that can be sort of shielded. There can be some buffers. I think there's the 32 corridor, which runs over to Leap. We can talk about that a little bit later as well. I mentioned the former Perry Township, but then even I think there's some infill opportunities. So I think it's just trying to be able to, I think the biggest thing probably around that is education. I don't think necessarily all of the residents of Zionsville, or for that matter, citizens of the state of Indiana, necessarily understand how municipal finance works. And I will say I certainly didn't before I took this role, even though I'd worked in state government. So I think if you can have that opportunity to have an education, because I think those concerns are legitimate. Those concerns are heartfelt. But if people understand that in order for us to, I think this is an interesting way to frame it, and I've thought about it a lot in this role. In order to preserve what we have, we also have to grow. We also have to modernize. We also have to bring investment. So people think that the modernization, the investment, the growth is going to damage what we have, but I think it actually allows us to preserve what we have.
And I think maybe the way that I've described and we have described Zionsville almost makes it seem like you're fully built out, right? When we're talking about high levels of residential, but it's really not. You've got room to play in this community, right? You referenced rural
67 square miles,
right? 67 square miles, and so you could establish districts that make more sense for some of this value add, commercial activity.
Yes.
And they don't have to be. It's not like we're trying to squeeze a warehouse in between, single family homes.
No.
Right? You can establish districts around. And what are we calling the district that's to the west of 65?
Perry Township.
That's Perry Township.
Perry Township. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, you and I were sitting there looking at a map, right? I mean, that is wide open space.
Yes.
And to any farmers that are randomly listening, we're not looking to come after your property right now, right? But when an economic developer is looking at maps of their community, in which we all live and breathe and die by maps,
right,
you have to look at where the open space is.
Yes.
Now, you don't want to divest of your agricultural heritage, but you also want to recognize that there are areas that maybe it's underproducing farmland or farmland that is well positioned, and it's going to go commercial someday, whether everybody likes it or not. So why not have it be a very structured, proactive, strategic, thoughtful exercise versus just reactive to whichever broker or developer gets their claws into it first?
Correct. And I think there are different tools we can use in order to try to have as much influence over the type of development, zoning is our biggest tool. Incentives is obviously another tool. So that if we choose to incentivize that, which is consistent with our community, if we use zoning to establish particularly via planned use districts and other tools to have the types of development we want to see. And again, I think we also need to be understanding of there are different types of property rights, and there are some individuals that would like to sell their property. So I think but again, at the same time, I also understand there's others that do not, and that want to have that way of life. So I think we can find a balance is the real key. And through that comprehensive plan I described earlier, I mentioned some of these different areas, being really intentional about that. I mean, that's been a process that's been going now for, I'd say approximately 2 years now, with lots of public input. And we have some commercial districts set up. We have, again, some of these more light industrial districts set up. So yes, we can be very intentional about it, but I think utilities is another one we have to be mindful of, because some of these areas that are not built out, there's a reason they're not built out, and it's utilities. And it's one of those sort of which one's leading to the other. Is there no development because there's no utilities, or is there no utilities because there's no development? And how do you push over one of the dominoes, or how do you figure out which one's the horse and which one's the cart? And how do you do that in a careful way? Because I think what some people have a concern is that when utilities do make it to a new area, that development will be rampant, and it will be at a speed that is too rapid. So being intentional about how that development will occur once utility service is extended to an area.
So when we're talking about the difference in uses, right? What is your vision for, you had talked about the corporate headquarters, advanced manufacturing, but let's make that even more myopically focused, right? So when we're talking about advanced manufacturing is such a broad term. In fact, I personally hate the term advanced manufacturing, because all manufacturing these days is advanced. But what industries in particular do you kind of envision as being a good fit for this highly affluent community that has room to grow?
Yeah, I think there's different principles we can use if we want to think about different districts across our town. If one's more focused on quote unquote advanced manufacturing, if one's more focused on the office type user. And I think there's some guiding principles that we would want to look at when establishing such districts. So again, if it's in the advanced manufacturing space, I think it's thinking about companies that will employ the type of folks that want to live in Zionsville anyway. Sort of this idea that why not be able to work where you live? And then what are some businesses that, are focused on being proximate to West Lafayette, focused on being proximate to Lilly, LEAP adjacent. I mentioned LEAP earlier. There are opportunities where It may not be someone that wants to be on a mega site, doesn't need that many acres, but wants to be close to some of the future users, known and future yet unknown. So I think that's going to be definitely a principle. Again, like you said earlier too, I think the size and scale and of what those users, those industrial users might be. And then in terms of an office use, I think it's trying to find areas in town where we can look at ways to think about accessibility, think about walkability, think about I'm looking out the window and there's a rail trail that goes right past Town Hall. We're recording here at Town Hall. We have it's an economic development day with blue skies. And there are ways that we can locate things along trails.
Economic development day. I like that.
Yes. Can we locate along these trails? Can we think about ways to, if we're going to have a little bit of a office business district, how does it also have some ways that it is active 7 days a week? So it's got some green space. It's got, the opportunity to have a cafe, a yoga place, so it's not just one of these places that hollows out, after 5 o'clock and then is empty for the weekends, but rather is a gathering place. So again, if it's along a trail, if it's a place where families can come, is it also a place where you can start to think about attracting more young professionals? We are a community that really focuses on people sort of in the, I'll call it 28 to 55, 60 range. We do have a number of seniors.
So everybody.
Well, less so in the 22 to 35 range. And so I think it's really just thinking about some of those different principles as you think about different districts, different nodes, different areas, and what we would be looking for in those.
Yeah, and this is, us pontificating, right, at our level, but really how you can get a good vibe, street level vibe, is through your network of brokers and developers. How do you make sure that your network with the brokers and developers is surrounding this community, how that network is active versus just a nice to have, right? Because they are the boots on the ground telling you what the market is saying.
Right. And I think that's something we probably need to do a better job of. I don't know if, I'll just say it, I don't know if Zionsville has been considered open for business in the past and being something that really wants to be involved in economic development. And I think it's another thing I wanted to talk about as well too, is you talked about some of those different northern suburbs, and there's different approaches, particularly in central Indiana, for economic development. Is that each municipality doing it on their own? Is that a Lido being the sole economic developer and sort of being on the bleeding edge? Or is that some combination? And we've really decided to take a combination partnership approach. So we work alongside the Indy Partnership and Jason Hester and his great team as part of the Indy Chamber. We will work alongside Andrea Kern and her team at the Boone County EDC, but then myself, and I have another terrific staff member that we are doing things here on the ground here in Zionsville. And then to your point, we also try to work with developers and brokers and that sort of thing. So we really want to think about it like a deep sea fishing. You have lots of lines in the water. You have lots of different lures. I can kind of sit up on the bridge and maybe I've got a depth finder, but there's no reason to just us be doing it. There's no reason, I think, for us to just solely outsource it to a Lido. Why? I think you can have the best of both worlds. And I think each of one of those entities can bring different value propositions. But yes, I think it's being able to establish a vision, being able to put that open for business sign out, and then being able to communicate with those brokers about what we're looking for. Because all too often what happens is brokers and their clients come with kind of a square peg, and you went back to what you said earlier about we know exactly what we want, and it's we have a round hole. So let's figure out a way to say, hey, this is what we're looking for. And I think that's the one thing we're going to do here as we start to get some more products, more developable sites, so that we can say, hey, these are specifically what we're looking for, but then also even go so far as to say, we know the exact type of fish we want. Let's go after those. Let's use our own network to say, how can we, almost like an inbound marketing, being much more proactive. And, what are some companies that we know are likely to grow? And some strategies that we talked about at times during our IEDC tenure, but not necessarily just waiting on the RFI, which I know is perhaps a little pie in the sky, and it's very hands-on, but I think it can be done.
I think it needs to be done. I think that's the right approach. And you brought up something interesting there. I was going to give you grief for your analogy, or I'll still do it. You can't be sitting on a bridge when you're deep sea fishing. That would be one hell of a bridge, is all I'm saying. But what I was going to get to here is you had mentioned the Boone County EDC, and an interesting dynamic that you all have here is that you have your traditional county EDC that covers the entire county, including Zionsville, but then you also have your own staff and team here.
Yes.
How do you collaborate with Boone County and try to ensure that they understand the unique needs and assets and restrictions that Zionsville presents?
No, I think it's a great question. And I think what we do, I mean, we speak with them on bi-weekly basis. So we get on the phone, we just share what we're working on. We have some things we're specifically working on. BR&E is one of them. Is trying to build out a more robust BR&E strategy. I think I will give lots of kudos to, again, Andrea and the team. They know that there are different priorities. There are different objectives that Whitestown has, that Lebanon has, that Zionsville have. So they know how they can be most helpful. I mean, one thing that's really exciting is we're working alongside Andrea and Shelby at the Boone EDC on some work around our Main Street. So they both came from OKRA, which is the Office of Community and Rural Affairs. So they helped run the Main Street program. And so we have a great Main Street Zionsville organization that has been stood up recently, so they can help alongside that. So I think it's really just understanding what are your skill sets. I think sometimes people say, oh, well, we can't have too many cooks in the kitchen. That may be true, but what you need to understand is that we have one cook that's doing prep and is really good at knife work, someone else that's really good at searing things, and someone else that makes desserts. So maybe I'm bad with analogies, but I think
no, that was good.
I don't
that was
when
good.
people say we can't have too many people. Like, no, you really just have to understand what people's roles and responsibilities are and how you get everybody doing what they're best at, and then you get the best possible result.
Who would you consider who's on first in leading the efforts? Is it the county?
I think we've sort of taken point.
You've taken point, yeah.
Because there's just the number of things that we have the knowledge about, but at the same time, we also, I say take point, but for example, when we respond to an RFI, that's something that we don't do that often. So we will provide all the information, and maybe Boone EDC is the one who actually responds.
Right.
They put together the response, so they take point in that regard. But in terms of from a strategy perspective, I think we take point.
That makes sense.
But from like a response to an RFI perspective, they're the ones at the tip of the spear.
So you really do have a great kitchen staff here, right? Because everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, right? Whereas, and I'm sure there's always going to be, disagreements, or there's going to be, hey, Boone County, why are you focusing over in this direction? We told you we like this type of thing, right? That happens. That's what happens. And good partners have those conversations with each other.
Yes.
Right. But it sounds like from an overall perspective, you all kind of know your roles and you know where you can best add to the overall growth of the community.
And our resources. I mean, Indie Partnership is going all around the world to different trade shows and different events, and we don't have the resources to do that, and they do. And so we invest in their effort. It goes back to our IEDC days. The IEDC would go get a booth at a trade show in another country, and those booths are rather expensive. And so we had smaller companies invest in sort of having micro sections of that booth. That same concept that we can go have Jason Hester and his team fly the flag of Central Indiana. Again, regionalism. I truly believe in regionalism, that the project will land where it will, but it's in our shared best interest for it to land in Central Indiana. And if a project lands in Westfield, that's good for Zionsville. If a project lands in Zionsville, that's good for Westfield. So we can go have the Indie Chamber and Indie Partnership, more specifically, doing that lead gen, doing some of that marketing, getting brand awareness. And then once it comes, then we can all compete, and Boone County EDC can help us compete, and we can help put our best foot forward, and we can align that with our comp plan, and we can align that with the mayor's vision, and we can align that with the work we do at the town council to try to bring this tax-based diversification efforts that I think all of our town council are very much united around. So it's really just taking what each of us is best able to do, particularly based on our resources, and execute.
And this is something that I went through when I was at River Ridge, which I'm actually rocking the old River Ridge hat right now. The River Ridge Commerce Center is on the Indiana side of the river. It's in both Jeffersonville and Charlestown, Indiana. And when I would travel abroad or anywhere around the country, getting in front of site selectors or getting in front of companies, in my early days, I was hell-bent on sticking to the term the River Ridge Commerce Center. Right. But just like for you all, your pride and your community that you represent is Zionsville.
Yes.
But I had to learn, and I learned very quickly that I wasn't going to fight if a site selector from Dallas referred to my commerce center as the Louisville North Industrial Park. Right. So you all have to have a sense of grace and allow yourselves to allow Jason to go out and talk about Indianapolis, greater Indianapolis. Right. Because I don't care who you are, if you're Carmel, if you're Fishers, if you're Zionsville, at some point when you get far enough around the world, nobody's ever heard of you.
100%.
But they've heard of Indianapolis.
Right. Or Chicago. I mean, this exact example you were giving, I gave the example of the Farnborough Air Show. So you're sitting in Farnborough in England at an air show. You've got this booth. Someone walks up from Japan or from Germany or from the Middle East, and I used to laugh because we'd bring these partners alongside us, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, do you want to learn more about West Lafayette?" And you're like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa! We got to start at like, you should invest in the United States. You should invest in the Midwest. You should invest in Indiana. You should invest in Tippecanoe County."
And by the way, the Midwest, we're actually Mid-East, right? Why are we calling the Midwest?
Yeah, so you're completely right that, but again, I also am personally motivated and paid to best represent that which is best for Zionsville, but in order to do that, I think we need, and again, it's why we invest in the Boone County EDC. It's why we invest in the Indy Partnership. It's why we want to, whenever there's opportunities to work alongside the IEDC, we want to do that, because you've got to really go for, again, going back to the fishing analogy, broad net. Because if they come to Indiana and then they're going to say, you know what, I think we probably want to be in Central Indiana, and then we want to try to have them be in Zionsville.
Right. So you have to work the funnel.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
It's a funnel, and if you have too much of an ego and assume that we have to make sure that the world knows where Zionsville is, you're probably not going to get very far.
Right.
Right.
Again, it goes back to that other strategy too, where if you're just relying on an RFI, then you have to kind of go through that funnel. What if we could divert the funnel and say, you know what, we really want to have this type of user, and then we already have a network of people. And how do we figure out which companies are growing, and how do we go through that network to put ourselves traditionally, and as you know, the best companies that are doing this in the most professional way are using consultants, and they're trying to do the best possible job to balance the needs from a human capital perspective, from a location perspective, from a tax benefit perspective. But I think we've got all those things in spades, and everybody does. So if we can use a little bit of an X factor of trying to find relationships and trying to get ourselves on the list when we wouldn't have been on the list otherwise.
Yeah.
So.
You mentioned before BRNE, and for those of you that are not in our profession, that stands for business retention and expansion. It really feels like this community, and you're doing it right. I am a firm believer, even though I'm a site selection consultant and I work in the world of attractions, right? You have to have your foundation laid, which is business retention and expansion. You have to take care of your existing. And there's a term that flows from that called economic gardening. Mm-hmm. Right? It almost feels like your short-term or near-term future, from what you've been saying, you are more focused on the BRNE than the attraction, right? Supporting your existing businesses, helping them grow and thrive, because you may have a 10-person consulting firm down the street that's ready to grow into 200, right? And they need a place to be able to grow and do it here.
Exactly. So I think it's both. I think, well, the one thing I'll say, even though I've really value attraction, is that probably the vast majority of job creation comes from small businesses and from existing businesses growing. That being said, there is still tremendous value in attracting businesses. But yes, we are going through that exact process now of trying to understand what are those companies that are already here in Zionsville. First question. What is the growth rate of those companies? Second question. Third question. Which one of those companies are going to get to a point where in their existing facility they cannot grow? Fourth question, where are they going to go, and where could that be in Zionsville? Because it's in our best interest for that place to not necessarily be in another municipality. So I think it's really trying to identify, going back to that idea of product, just like you want to have product for the attraction project, you also need to try to make sure you have product for your expansion project. And then I think it also applies to entrepreneurship. If you're going to try to have an entrepreneurial ecosystem, if you're doing your job right, you've got the company that starts with 1, becomes 5, becomes 10, becomes 100. And if you have nowhere to put a 100-person company, then it's not as effective. You want to be able to support them throughout the whole life cycle.
Yeah, I mean, you have to make a decision, right? Is Zionsville the place where companies get started, and when they become too big, they have to go elsewhere?
Right.
And that's okay, right? That can be a strategy. Or do you want Zionsville to be the place that can have a company, an entrepreneur that starts with 1 to 2, back down to 1 in some cases,
right?
But then all of a sudden blows up, and guess what? There's product for them to stay in this affluent community. And now you've got that 3-legged stool stood up, right? The live, work, and play.
Yes.
Right? So we're going to go to break real quick. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the future, and we're going to talk a little bit about networking and the future of Zionsville economic development. So we will be right back. All right, and we're back. So we've been having a good conversation about Zionsville, about municipal economic development in a highly affluent community. Justin, you've been around the block a few times, as I have as well, right? So what advice would you give to somebody who's new and trying to get into the world of municipal economic development?
I think a good entry point into municipal economic development is often through planning. So, whether if that's a world that you want to enter into, I think really, if you want to understand the fabric of a community, understanding the planning, zoning, building codes, that sort of thing, I think that's a good entry point. I also think, though, that particularly in the northern suburbs, there are robust economic development departments. I always think that working in state government is helpful. I mean, that's just the path I took. So, and there's a really robust, I think, training grounds in the IEDC in terms of understanding. Because again, if you go back to that funnel, that's often where a lot of things start. When you have that site sector that says, "Hey, my client's looking for Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois, and wants to be within 50 miles of an airport, wants X number of acres, and wants this type of electricity and that sort of thing." So I think whether it's going through the planning phase, I think we have a certain host that's a proud graduate of Ball State. If you got lots of folks that are going to the planning process, that's I think that's a good, because you'll see in some municipalities too, you'll see there'll be someone who oversees both economic development and planning because they're directly linked. So I think that's one route. I think the state is another route. So I think those are good ways to get involved. Indiana Economic Development Association is a good way to meet folks from across the state if that's something you're interested in. But it's weird because I don't think economic development is something that's necessarily on the radar screen of people coming out of college.
No.
And like you said, I think earlier, everybody stumbles into it. So
I mean, there's one program in the country, University of Mississippi, that even has, I think it's a grad program in economic development. Right. We all have to fall into this in different ways. And I've talked about on a prior episode about how really you got me into economic development, joke side, right? It was literally, you asked me one day, I think we sat down for lunch on the canal, and you just asked, "Have you ever heard of the IEDC?" And I said, "Nope." He said, "Well, are you looking for an internship?" And I said, "Yep." He said, "Let me introduce you to Steve Akert." And
yes.
I guess it would have been Lori Cool at the time instead of Maroney. I think she was already cool. Anyways, she was always cool.
I knew that one was coming.
Yeah, right. But, we always get into it in different ways. And so I think that's really good advice, Justin, that if you're looking to get into this and you have the ability to maybe start in planning or start at the state level, because once you get into municipal economic development, I don't want to say this is a lonely job, but it's usually a very small team.
Yes.
Right. And so you don't have a huge support system internally. You are the support system.
Right.
Right. And you now have, how long have you had a number two?
I came into this role in August of 24. And then I stepped into this this economic development role in January of 25. And I've had him the whole time. I'll be perfectly honest, I'm extremely grateful. I think he also came from the planning space. That's part of the reason why I said yes to it. And because I mentioned, I'm doing all sorts of other things related to every aspect of this town and, focus on economic development in pockets. And he's doing the vast majority of the work the rest of the time. And I'm extremely grateful and I'm very proud. And he does terrific work. So we wouldn't be able to do economic development in the town of Zionsville without his work and him being focused on it, day in and day out.
Day in and day out, yeah. And by the way, folks, so the last time when we had Jim Plump on, Jim's go-to was he clicked the pen into the mic. Justin, if you're hearing it, he likes to do this. He likes to rub the tables. If you're hearing it, that's what's going on. So that is my very sly way of saying, Justin, put your hands up, man. It happens, right? I mean, Justin, this is the first time you've ever been on a podcast.
That's correct, yes.
Right? And so it's interesting trying to figure out how is the mic picking things up. And we even, we looked at this room, and is this room going to work for the, the acoustics? And at home, I actually have sound acoustic paneling on my walls. Right, not the entire thing. I'm not living in a dungeon, but right here, right. So it's interesting how it all picks up. And if anybody's interested in that, you can go back to the episode where I talk about my podcast setup. But getting back into networking and how you kind of present, as networking shifts to become more digital, right, with the advent of, COVID really pushed us into a more digital world. Can you really sell the vibe of Zionsville digitally, virtually on the internet, or does it really take people coming to town to understand what this place is and the magic that's behind it?
I think you do need to see it to believe it and see it in person. But I will say, so one of the things we did in February of 2025, we did an economic development summit. We did a really cool session where we brought in a facilitator and talked about what does economic development look like in Zionsville, and then based on that, what are some near and long-term goals we can work on. The top 3 goals in the near term were to think about making sure we get the comprehensive plan right, which, like I said, we're in the tail end of. Hotel and meeting space, that's something we haven't really talked about. It's not traditionally economic development, and particularly from a site selection attraction perspective, but I think it's vitally important. And then we did a hotel study, and we can talk about that more if you'd like. And then the third one was trying to better communicate to existing businesses and to businesses that might want to come to Zionsville. And many municipal websites are utilitarian, I'll say, at best. So we have done an effort to build a completely separate economic development website, which we're excited to roll out here in the near term.
And who's building that?
We worked alongside a communications consultant, but we did a lot of the work ourselves, and it's a lot more work than I ever anticipated.
It's a lot. I just built my own website.
It's a very, very long project. And so, I mean, that's one effort. I mean, again, I still think that to really see something, it's as you know, you go on fam tours, that sort of thing, you got to see it in person. But in order to be able to have an online marketing presence, we wanted to, and then I think we're going to start to think about social media, in the right ways, LinkedIn primarily. But I think those are the ways that we would try to do that in the more digital world.
Well, it's very similar to starting up a business like I've been going through, right?
Yes.
Even down to designing your business cards, right? And now I'm sure you already have a template that you have to follow, but designing the look and feel and vibe of your digital infrastructure so that it mirrors the vibe that people get when they come to town.
Yes.
That's when you know that you're successful.
Right.
When you get that same feeling when you go onto this new website as you would when you come to town. And you had said we can talk about this. I do want to talk about this. Talk to me, because you had said that maybe hotels are not something that I think about as a site selector, but I can tell you when I'm traveling, I think about the hotels that I get put in. Right. So tell me about this hotel strategy that you just referenced.
Again, 67 square miles, about 35,000 residents, and 8 hotel rooms in the town of Zionsville. So we have one boutique bed and breakfast, 8 hotel rooms.
Wow.
So you go back to that idea of you want people to work here because when they work here, they go to lunch here, they go to the dry cleaner, they go to the bank, they do other things. We have people that come and visit our town, but they don't sleep here. And when you sleep here, then you go to dinner here, and you wake up the next morning, you go to breakfast, and you shop here. And then meeting space, that's also a really important one. So whether it's for Zionsville Chamber events, whether it's for weddings, whether it's for town events, go back to that idea of having more employers here. So particularly in a remote world, let's say the corporate headquarters is here and 50 people work here or 100 people work here. And then once a year, they bring in all 400. We want them to come here. We want them to stay in a hotel here. We want them to go to dinners at our amazing restaurants here. We want that all to happen here. We've got this Indianapolis Executive Airport. It is the 5th busiest non-towered airport in the country.
The 5th busiest towered
airport in the country. But we know for a fact that when people they land there, they don't even realize they're landing in Zionsville. They don't come to Zionsville. They go to hotels in downtown Indianapolis. They go to hotels in Carmel. So from a myriad of reasons, we think it's valuable to have meeting space and a hotel here in Zionsville. And like I said, we worked with, I'll give a shout out to 100 Partners. They're a great consulting firm in the hospitality space, and they do stuff around sports hospitality and sports developments as well. So they helped us do a hotel feasibility study, understand what the drivers of demand are, really understand what the supply is like, do a market study. We provided that, and trying to now come alongside the development community and landowners to think where a good project might go. But we think that's vitally important to, bringing in employers, being able to leverage that airport, being able to keep more. It's really about keeping dollars in Zionsville. So it's not people that are going to work and spending their money elsewhere. It's not people that are going to they might come visit here, but they don't spend the night here. Then they don't go to dinner here. They don't shop here. So if we can keep more dollars in Zionsville, I think that's really what we're trying to do in many different ways.
Absolutely. And the residents, right, that are currently taking on the chin, the lion's share of keeping the services going in this community should be thankful, right, and should appreciate the fact that the more of that you can bring in, the less of a burden the services will be on them alone.
Yeah, and you talk about the residents. This is another small example. You have 12 of your family come for holidays. They stay in the hotel too. And then there's lots of different drivers of demand for hotels. Grand Park, particularly your listeners that aren't here in Central Indiana, one of the largest sports complexes in the Midwest. Every hotel within a probably 30-mile radius fills up. We just had the Final Four. Every hotel within a 9-county region fills up. We get the Indianapolis 500, the largest single-day sporting event in the world, once a year. So there's lots of different exciting drivers for demand. Let's get those people to stay in Zionsville. There's a really cool opportunity if you're getting us to do it. I've never done it. You could take a helicopter from Indianapolis Executive Airport to the Speedway. And why not stay in Zionsville when you go to the race? So once we have a hotel here in the near future, we will have one, and you'll be able to take your helicopter, take the helicopter. They'll ferry you back and forth from the Indianapolis Executive Airport at 32 and 421. They're right around there, and then go down to the Speedway, land right on the golf course, and then come right back.
That's a really good idea. By the way, before we get too far, I always like to give a shout out to consultants that are mentioned that have done a great job. What was the name of that group again?
Hunden Partners.
Hunden,
yes. Hunden Partners.
All right. So Hunden Partners, that is hunden.com for those of you that are listening and looking for a good hospitality-focused consulting firm.
Convention centers as well, yep.
And convention centers, right on. So before we wrap here, obviously a big announcement in the region a couple of years ago that it's now rolling is the LEAP district.
Yes.
So that is not within Zionsville, but it's right next door.
Correct.
How are you taking advantage of the activity that's going on up at LEAP? And let's be candid, that activity is the type that you probably, maybe you do want. I haven't seen any heavy industry announcements, but it's a good fit up there. But how, given your proximity to that, how are you taking advantage of that new activity?
There's a few different ways that I think I used the term LEAP adjacent earlier. So if there are opportunities, right now the two announced projects within LEAP are a tremendous $10 billion plus, I believe, investment by Lilly, both on the manufacturing side and then also sort of research and design around manufacturing. So they call it the Foundry. And then also Meta is building a data center there. So are there opportunities that, you go back to, for those from Indiana, we have Honda, we have Subaru, we have Toyota, and they have their suppliers. What are some of those suppliers? What are some of those partners? What are some of those companies that need to be in proximity to things at LEAP? So again, whether that's, I would say less so perhaps the data center, but whether that's Lilly or whether that's, any number of future tenants that it will be within LEAP. I think also having that airport there is really important. So I think there's going to be individuals who, because it's far enough away that you may, and particularly if it's planes that are corporate travel, that's a lot of what you're getting there at Indianapolis Executive Airport is. So if you start to have people that are landing there and then again, stay in the hotel, go over to LEAP, do your business, come back, stay, go to our great restaurants, then fly right out of the airport. It's directly down 32. It's a straight shot along 32 to get to LEAP. So I think those are some of the things we're trying to leverage.
And this is what building an ecosystem looks like, by the way, folks. I talk about building ecosystems, and generally when I'm talking about building ecosystems, I'm talking about primary employment, right? As Deputy Mayor Hage had put out, you may have a Honda or a Subaru, right? And they need an ecosystem of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers kind of within proximity to their plant. But there's a different way to build ecosystems. And I love what you've been talking about. I'm seeing the vision about, utilizing the assets that you have, your high wage, affluent community, the way that it presents, the Indianapolis Executive Airport, the ability to get up to Lebanon, stay in this community once you have hotels, have meetings here, right? Be able to get downtown. How long does it take to get downtown Indianapolis?
25 minutes.
25 minutes, right? You can be downtown Indianapolis in 25 minutes, and you could be staying in the community where your private jet is parked, right, for that meeting, right? And the benefit then to Zionsville is you have more people from out of town seeing the community, exploring the community, spending their money in your community, and it all snowballs from there. So speaking of the high wage, high expectation, here's my last question for you. What do you want site selectors and corporate decision makers to know about working with a high wage, high expectation, affluent community?
Again, I think it's really about finding that right fit. I think it's about understanding that the human capital piece is there, the quality of life is there. I think all too often communities are trying to build that in order to pursue that, but we already have that. So it's really trying to bring opportunities that are a good fit for that that municipality, that town, that city, and being ready to have that incentive discussion, but also understand that the number one important thing for companies in that HQ space, that professional services, that R&D is people. You can buy equipment, to some degree, the location is less important. This isn't logistics. This isn't where you have to be in a specific location to get your product on the road, to get your product on the rail, to get your product on the barge. Your most important product is your people, and it's those brains, those minds, that human capital. So I think it's really having a discussion around what is that community going to provide, and what can that company provide for that community? Because I think that's really the most important part. Yep.
And you know what? And that's perfect. The biggest selling point of this community, I think, is the people.
Yes.
Right. You've got fantastic people living and playing in this community, and I'm sure a lot of them would love to also work here. Right. And so if you're a corporate decision maker or a site selector and you have the right type of project that Justin has alluded to throughout this conversation, you're not going to find better human capital anywhere, I'm going to say, in the Midwest than Zionsville, Indiana.
So we also have a small town feel too. I mean, that's the thing that I love about Zionsville is we're a growing community. We're in the Donuts counties here. We have, suburban location right next to the, largest MSA, but we also still have a small town feel, which I think, and terrific schools and lovely park systems. We've got all the elements for really great quality of life.
Absolutely. So hopefully you've seen the last question here and you've come prepared for it. Justin, I always ask my guest at the end of an interview or at the end of one of these episodes to give me either your best fun fact or your best appropriate joke.
I think the fun fact we like to talk about here in Zionsville, so we have a Lincoln Park, which is right inside the village, and it's actually getting a nice refresh right now. And so Lincoln came through Zionsville in 1861 on his way to Washington to be inaugurated, and gave a speech, on the back of the train car, as he did in many places between Springfield and DC. And then unfortunately, just a few years later, in 1865, his funeral train came through here in Zionsville. So, and we have a really cool mural that sits right next to Lions Park. And as the result of an anonymous gift, we were going to have a really cool bronze statue. If those folks who know the bronze statue of Peyton Manning outside of Lucas Oil Stadium, the same artist that created that is going to create a full-size statue of Lincoln that will go in that park here, probably in 2027. That will go in place, but that park will be refreshed later in the year. So
very cool. Is this why your dog's name is Lincoln?
And I also have a dog named Lincoln. But yes, I'm a big fan of Lincoln. But yes, it's one of the reasons. Yes,
I actually have a page, a reproduction of a page from the Constitution with Abraham Lincoln riding a dinosaur on it. I don't know why, but I used to run the Dino Tax Credit program. I thought it was hilarious, so I got it. But anyways. Justin, pleasure having you on. Thank you for telling us a little bit more about Zionsville, talking to us about a really interesting topic, how you do economic development in an affluent community, one that is very proud of its heritage and is looking to diversify into the future. So, folks, as always, my name is Devin Hillsdon-Smith, and I am your host of Site Selectors Are People Too. Justin, thanks for being on, buddy.
Thanks so much, Devin.
All right, cheers. Just a heads up, views expressed in this podcast are solely my own and are not attributable to any employers, whether past or present. Thank you.